a mother leopard begged a man to save her dying cubs. But what happened next is unbelievable. On a scorching summer day, he thought it was just another walk through the wilderness till the impossible happened. A wild predator, instead of attacking, pleaded for help. Two tiny cubs, barely breathing, their lives hanging by a thread. But when he stepped in to save them, he uncovered something darker than anyone could have imagined. This wasn't nature's accident, it was deliberate. And the truth lurking behind those poisoned cubs would drag him into a deadly fight against forces far more dangerous than the wilderness itself. Why would someone want these innocent cubs dead? And once the truth comes out, will saving them cost him everything? Before we dive in, say hello in the comments. I love knowing where these stories are finding a home. The summer sun beat down mercilessly across the Montana wilderness, creating shimmering waves of heat that rose from the dusty ground. Wilton Reeves wiped his forehead with the back of his hand as he made his way through the brush, his worn boots crunching softly against the dry earth. His weather-beaten notebook was clutched in one hand, filled with the careful observations that most of his colleagues seemed to think weren't worth their time. The 35-year-old wildlife technician had grown used to working alone. His quiet nature and methodical approach to his work often led others to overlook him, but Wilton found peace in his solitary surveys. The isolation allowed him to focus on what really mattered, protecting and understanding the wild creatures that called these lands home. He paused to jot down notes about a set of deer tracks when an unusual sound caught his attention. It was a deep, guttural cry, not quite a growl, but filled with unmistakable distress. Wilton's head snapped up, his body tensing as he scanned the surrounding vegetation. There, not 20 feet away, stood a female leopard. Her sleek coat was dulled by dust and her ribs showed clearly through her fur, but what struck Wilton most was the desperate look in her amber eyes. She should have run. Every instinct of a wild animal should have sent her fleeing from human contact. Instead, she took a step closer, letting out another anguished cry. "Easy there," Wilton said softly, his heart hammering in his chest. He'd worked with wildlife for years, but this was different. Something was terribly wrong. The mother leopard's behavior defied everything he knew about these solitary, shy creatures. The big cat paced back and forth, her tail twitching agitatedly. Then she moved a few steps away, looked back at him, and let out another cry. Wilton had spent enough time observing wildlife to recognize the clear invitation in her behavior. "You want me to follow you?" he whispered, hardly believing what he was seeing. The leopard responded by moving further away, then stopping to ensure he was coming. Against every safety protocol he'd ever learned, Wilton followed. The mother led him through dense brush, occasionally looking back to make sure he was still behind her. After about 50 yards, she disappeared into what appeared to be a small den beneath a rocky overhang. Wilton approached cautiously, his experienced eyes catching details that made his blood run cold. Near the den's entrance, he spotted scattered pieces of meat that gave off a sickly sweet odor. Poisoned bait. Hidden in the undergrowth, the metallic glint of cruel steel traps caught his eye. The mother's strange behavior suddenly made horrible sense. Dreading what he might find, Wilton crouched down and peered into the den. His heart sank at the sight that greeted him. Two leopard cubs lay on their sides, their small bodies racked with labored breathing. Their spotted coats, which should have been glossy with health, were dull and matted with sweat. One cub's eyes were closed, while the other managed only weak mewling sounds that broke Wilton's heart. "Oh no," he breathed, reaching for his satellite phone with trembling hands. This was no accident. The carefully placed bait and traps spoke of deliberate malice. Someone had intentionally targeted these magnificent creatures, and the thought filled him with a quiet rage that contrasted sharply with his usually mild demeanor. The mother leopard stood nearby, watching him with those intense eyes that seemed to hold both fear and hope. She made no move to stop him as he carefully examined her cubs, her trust in him both extraordinary and humbling. "I'm going to help them," he promised her softly, though he knew she couldn't understand his words. But perhaps she understood his tone, because she settled down at the den's entrance, her eyes never leaving her suffering young. Wilton's mind raced with the implications of what he'd discovered. This wasn't just about saving these cubs anymore, though that was certainly his immediate priority. This was evidence of illegal wildlife persecution, carefully planned and brutally executed. Someone would have to be held accountable for this. He waited for help to arrive. Wilton kept a careful vigil over the small family. The mother's trust in him, born of desperate need, filled him with a fierce determination. He might be the quiet one, the one people tended to ignore, but he would not let this crime go unpunished. These creatures deserved justice, and he would make sure they got it. The day's oppressive heat seemed to press down even harder as Wilton documented everything with his camera. His hands steady despite his inner turmoil. He carefully photographed the poisoned bait, the hidden traps, and the suffering cubs, building a record that would serve as evidence of this cruel act. The mother leopard's eyes never left him as he worked, a protective instinct warring with her desperate need for help. Her trust in him, born of absolute necessity, was a responsibility Wilton felt deep in his soul. In all his years of wildlife work, he'd never experienced anything quite like this moment. this connection between human and wild creature, forged in crisis and desperation. As the sun continued its merciless beatdown on the Montana wilderness, Wilton Reeves found himself at the center of a situation that would challenge everything he thought he knew about his quiet life. The scene before him, the poisoned cubs, the frantic mother, the carefully laid traps, spoke of a darkness he hadn't expected to find on his routine summer survey. But as he continued his careful documentation, Wilton knew with absolute certainty that he would see this through. No matter where it led, the summer sun beat down mercilessly across the Montana wilderness, creating shimmering waves of heat that rose from the dusty ground. Wilton Reeves wiped his forehead with the back of his hand as he made his way through the brush, his worn boots crunching softly against the dry earth. His weather-beaten notebook was clutched in one hand, filled with meticulous observations that few of his colleagues ever bothered to read. The mother leopard's desperate cries still echoed in his ears. As he carefully gathered the 2 poisoned cubs, his hands trembled slightly, but his movements were quick and purposeful. The cubs' small bodies felt frighteningly light in his arms, their usually vibrant spotted coats now dull and matted with sweat, their shallow, labored, breathing sent waves of worry through him. "Hang in there, little ones," he whispered, cradling them close as he hurried back to his truck. The mother leopard followed at a distance, her golden eyes never leaving her babies. Wilton's heart ached at her obvious distress, but there was no time for sentiment. Every second counted. He laid the cubs carefully on a blanket in the passenger seat of his weathered pickup truck. The nearest wildlife veterinary clinic was 45 minutes away, and he knew these precious minutes could mean the difference between life and death. As he drove, he kept glancing at the cubs, watching their chests rise and fall with increasing difficulty. Come on, he muttered, pressing down harder on the accelerator. The truck bounced over the rough country roads, dust billowing. Behind them, through his rearview mirror, he caught glimpses of the mother leopard keeping pace, a testament to her determination and maternal instinct. At the clinic, Dr. Sarah Martinez took one look at the cubs and immediately sprang into action. Deliberate poisoning, she confirmed grimly, examining the telltale signs Wilton had noticed. Probably strychnine, based on the symptoms. Someone laid out bait specifically targeting predators. Wilton paced the small examination room as Dr. Martinez and her team worked to stabilize the cubs. "I found hidden traps too," he said, his voice tight with contained anger. "This wasn't some accident. Someone's systematically trying to eliminate these animals." The local sheriff, who'd been called in as a matter of protocol, seemed less concerned. "Look, Reeves," he said, leaning against the doorframe with an air of dismissal. "Predator control's just part of ranching country. Can't expect folks to just let their livestock get picked off." "This isn't predator control," Wilton insisted, his usually quiet voice carrying an edge of steel. "This is illegal poisoning. Those cubs weren't threatening anyone's livestock." The sheriff shrugged. "Not much we can do without proof of who did it. And honestly, most folks around here won't shed tears over a few less predators." Wilton felt his jaw clench. He'd heard this attitude before, the casual dismissal, the implicit suggestion that he should just let it go. But looking at those cubs, fighting for their lives, he knew he couldn't walk away. Through the clinic's window, he could see the mother leopard pacing in the tree line behind the building. She hadn't abandoned her cubs, despite the human activity. Her devotion only strengthened his resolve. Hours passed as Dr. Martinez worked to counteract the poison. Wilton refused to leave, helping where he could, monitoring vital signs, and keeping careful notes of everything he observed. The evidence of deliberate poisoning was clear to anyone who cared to look. The concentration of the toxin, the strategic placement of the bait, the hidden traps nearby. Someone knew exactly what they were doing. As night fell, one of the cubs took a turn for the worse. Its breathing became more labored, its small body trembling with each struggled breath. Dr. Martinez worked frantically to stabilize it, but Wilton could see the concern in her eyes. "Come on, little fighter," he whispered, gently stroking the cub's head. "Don't give up now." The mother leopard's occasional calls from the darkness outside seemed to pierce right through him. Each cry carried the weight of her worry, her helplessness, her desperate hope. Wilton felt the responsibility settle heavily on his shoulders. These cubs weren't just patients anymore. They were a symbol of everything he'd witnessed in his years of wildlife work. The casual cruelty, the disregard for nature's balance, the dismissal of life that didn't directly benefit human interests. "I don't care what anyone says," he told Dr. Martinez as they monitored the cubs through the night. "This isn't right, and I'm not going to pretend it is. Someone's going to be held accountable." She nodded, understanding in her eyes. "You know you'll be fighting an uphill battle, right? Most people around here won't want to hear it. Then they'll have to learn to listen," Wilton replied, his quiet determination stronger than ever. He watched the weaker cub struggle for breath, its sibling lying nearby, both of them innocent victims of human cruelty. "Because this stops now." Outside, the mother leopard's call echoed once more through the darkness, a reminder of what was at stake. Wilton stood at the window, watching her shadowy form move through the trees. He'd always been the quiet one, the one people overlooked or ignored. But now, watching these cubs fight for their lives, he knew that sometimes the quietest voice had to be the one to speak the loudest truth. The night stretched on, each moment critical in the cubs' fight for survival. Wilton remained steadfast. At his post, his determination growing stronger with each passing hour. This wasn't just about saving 2 leopard cubs anymore, it was about standing up against a systematic destruction that too many had chosen to ignore. The morning sun cast long shadows across the clinic parking lot as Wilton approached his truck, his shoulders heavy from another night of monitoring the cubs. He stopped short, frowning at the sight before him. All 4 tires lay flat against the pavement, clearly slashed with deliberate precision. "Great," he muttered, running a hand through his hair. This wasn't a random act of vandalism. The cuts were too clean, too purposeful. Someone wanted to send him a message. Back at his office later that day, Wilton discovered his field notes were missing from his locked desk drawer. The lock showed no signs of forced entry, suggesting someone had a key. His stomach tightened as he realized the implications. These weren't isolated incidents. At the local diner, conversations died when he walked in. Familiar faces turned away, and whispers followed him to his usual corner booth. "Causing trouble again, Reeves." "Old Jim," the cook called out from behind the counter. "Heard you're stirring up problems for honest ranchers." Wilton kept his voice steady. "Just doing my job, Jim. Following the law. Some laws need bending out here. You'd do well to remember that." The pieces started falling into place when Wilton overheard 2 ranch hands talking about Darren Cole's latest cleanup operation. Cole's sprawling cattle empire dominated the region, and his influence reached deep into local politics and law enforcement. "Cole won't take kindly to interference," one of them said, loud enough for Wilton to hear. "Never has." Researching further, Wilton uncovered a pattern. Every time predators threatened Cole's interests, they mysteriously disappeared. No investigations followed, no questions asked. The ranch baron's power kept everyone in line. The next day, while checking trail cameras in a remote area, Wilton noticed something wrong with his climbing gear. The rope looked frayed in an unnatural way. Examining it closely, he found clean cuts partially through the material, not enough to be obvious, but enough to fail under his weight. His hands shook as he packed up the compromised equipment. This wasn't just intimidation anymore. Someone, Cole's people, he was certain, had tried to hurt him. Back at the clinic, Dr. Martinez noticed his distraction. "Everything okay, Wilton? You seem on edge." He told her about the incidents, watching her face grow serious. "Cole's behind it," he concluded. "He's been poisoning predators for years, using his influence to keep it quiet. The cubs were just the latest victims. Be careful," she warned. "Cole's not used to people standing up to him. He's got half the county in his pocket." Wilton looked at the surviving cub, now showing signs of recovery. Its sibling hadn't made it through that first night, but this one kept fighting. "Someone has to stop him," he said quietly. "Otherwise, nothing changes." Later that week, Wilton found a note on his windshield. No signature, just 5 words. "Last chance. Walk away now." He crumpled the paper in his fist. The old Wilton might have backed down, might have convinced himself it wasn't his fight, but watching that mother leopard return night after night, grieving one cub while waiting for the other, had changed something in him. At his desk that evening, Wilton began organizing his evidence. The poisoned bait samples, photos of the traps, documentation of similar incidents on Cole's land, the pattern of predator disappearances. Alone in his office, surrounded by proof of systematic destruction, he understood the true scope of what he faced. This wasn't just about saving 2 leopard cubs anymore. It was about confronting a system that valued profit over preservation, power over protection. Cole's empire was built on eliminating anything that threatened his bottom line, and Wilton had stumbled into the middle of it. His phone rang, breaking the silence. "Remember what happens to troublemakers," a gruff voice said before hanging up. Wilton stared at the phone for a long moment. The threat hung in the air, as tangible as the evidence spread across his desk. He thought about the mother, Leopard, still faithfully returning to check on her surviving cub, about the quiet courage it took to keep going when everything seemed stacked against you. The intimidation, the isolation, the danger, it was all meant to make him give up. That's how Cole maintained his control. But as Wilton carefully documented each incident, each threat, he felt his resolve strengthen. Sometimes the biggest changes started with the smallest stands. Outside his window, the Montana sunset painted the sky in fierce colors, a reminder of the wild beauty he'd sworn to protect. The surviving cub was getting stronger every day, proof that sometimes beating the odds just took one person refusing to look the other way. Wilton gathered his evidence into a secure file. Cole might have power and influence, but Wilton had something stronger: the truth and the determination to make it known, no matter what came next. Wilton knew he needed help, but in a small Montana town where Darren Cole's influence ran deep, allies were scarce. His truck still sat in the repair shop, the slashed tires, a constant reminder of the threat hanging over him. With a borrowed vehicle from the wildlife department, he drove to the Mountain Valley Veterinary Clinic. His last hope for professional support, the clinic's weathered sign creaked in the wind. as he pulled into the gravel parking lot. Inside, he found Dr. Isabel Hartwell examining a farmer's injured sheep. Her sharp eyes barely glanced his way as she finished her work, her movements precise and confident. "Dr. Hartwell?" Wilton approached once the farmer left. "I'm Wilton Reeves. From Wildlife Services. I need your expertise on a poisoning case." Isabel's expression hardened. "The leopard cubs everyone's talking about." She peeled off her latex gloves with quick, practiced motions. "Look, Mr. Reeves, I've got enough problems with Cole's crowd without taking on their pet project. This isn't about taking sides," Wilton pressed, keeping his voice low and steady. "Two cubs are fighting for their lives. One might not make it through the week. I just need someone to verify the toxicology. And you think I don't know what happens next?" Isabel crossed her arms. "Cole's lawyers show up, claim it was authorized predator control, and anyone who says different finds themselves run out of business." She shook her head. "You're either naive or foolish." Wilton stood his ground, meeting her skeptical gaze. "Or maybe I just believe some things are worth fighting for, even when the odds are bad." Something in his quiet determination made Isabel pause. She studied him for a long moment, then sighed. "Show me what you've got." At the wildlife treatment facility, Isabel examined the cubs with growing concern. Her professional detachment cracked as she noticed the younger cub's labored breathing, and the older one's weakening pulse. The mother leopard watched from the edge of the enclosure, her eyes never leaving her babies. "This isn't standard poison," Isabel muttered, reviewing Wilton's notes. "The compound is sophisticated, expensive, not something any random rancher would have access to." Wilton nodded. "I found similar traces at 3 other sites, all on the edges of Cole's property. And these marks here," Isabel pointed to strange bruising patterns she'd discovered. "They're consistent with forced feeding. Someone made sure these cubs ingested the poison." As they compared observations, Isabel's initial skepticism gave way to grudging respect. Wilton's attention to detail, his careful documentation, and his quiet persistence spoke of something deeper than naive idealism. "You know what you're risking, don't you?" she asked, looking up from the medical charts. "Cole doesn't just push people out, he destroys them." "I know," Wilton said simply, "but if we don't stand up to him, who will?" Isabel ran a hand through her hair, conflict clear on her face. Finally, she straightened her shoulders. "All right, I'll help document the evidence. But we do this my way, everything by the book, verified. We can't give them any excuse to dismiss the findings." For the first time in days, Wilton felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He wasn't alone anymore. Together, they spent hours organizing their data, cross-referencing similar cases, and building a foundation for their investigation. As evening approached, they heard vehicles pulling up outside the facility. Through the window, they spotted 2 of Cole's ranch hands circling the building, their presence an unsubtle warning. "They're watching us now," Isabel said quietly, her face tense but determined. "You still sure about this?" Wilton met her gaze, steadily, more sure than ever. "Are you?" A slight smile crossed Isabel's face. "Well, I always did enjoy a good fight." She turned back to their work, her movements more purposeful than before. "Let's give them something worth watching." They worked late into the night, aware that their alliance had just painted an even bigger target on both their backs. But as Wilton watched Isabel skillfully tend to the cubs, he felt something he hadn't experienced since this whole ordeal began. Sometimes, he realized, the right partner could make all the difference between a futile gesture and a real chance at justice. The morning sun cast long shadows across Isabel's clinic as she spread out a map of the valley on her desk. Red marks dotted the paper like angry wounds, each one representing a location where Wilton had found evidence of poisoned bait or illegal traps. Isabel leaned forward, her sharp eyes scanning the pattern while Wilton stood beside her, his arms crossed. "See how they form a perimeter?" Isabel traced her finger along the marks. "This isn't random. Someone's creating a kill zone." Wilton nodded, his jaw tight. "And look here." He pointed to a cluster of marks near the eastern ridge. "Every spot where I've found dead predators is within 5 miles of Cole's main ranch." "We need more than circumstantial evidence," Isabel said, running a hand through her hair. "Cole's got too much power in this valley to accuse him without solid proof. Those cubs are dying." Wilton's voice cracked with frustration. "We can't wait." Isabel stood up straight, meeting his gaze. "I know it's hard, but rushing and half-cocked will only make things worse. Trust me, I've dealt with Cole before." They spent the next several hours combing through Isabel's records of treated wildlife, matching dates and locations. A pattern emerged wherever Cole's cattle operations expanded, predator populations plummeted. Not just leopards, but wolves, bears, and mountain lions too. "Look at this," Isabel said, pulling out an old file. 3 years ago, we had healthy predator populations throughout the valley. Then Cole bought the Thompson Ranch, and suddenly we're seeing mass die-offs. Wilton paced the room, his hands clenched. "We need to expose this now. Every day we wait, more animals die. And if we move too soon, Cole will bury the evidence and discredit us both." Isabel countered. "We need documentation, witnesses, something concrete." Their debate was interrupted by Isabel's phone buzzing. Her face paled as she listened to the caller. Wilton, she said urgently. That was Sarah from the gas station. She saw 3 of Cole's men heading toward your cabin. They had gas cans. Wilton's blood ran cold. He bolted for his truck, Isabel calling after him. The drive to his cabin was a blur of dust and desperate speed. As he rounded the final bend, orange flames lit up the twilight sky. His small home was engulfed, smoke billowing into the darkening air. He slammed on the brakes, watching in horror as the flames consumed everything he owned. The heat hit him like a wall as he stumbled from the truck. A lifetime of research, notes, equipment, and personal belongings all turning to ash before his eyes. The crack of a rifle shot split the air. A bullet whizzed past his head, kicking up dirt at his feet. Wilton dove behind his truck as 2 more shots rang out. Through the smoke, he caught glimpses of figures moving in the tree line. This is your last warning, Reeves. A voice called out. Next time we won't miss. Wilton's heart hammered in his chest as he crawled along the ground, keeping the truck between himself and the shooters. When he reached the driver's side, he yanked the door open and scrambled inside. Bullets pinged off the metal as he gunned. The engine and reversed, then spun the wheel hard, fishtailing onto the access road. But drive back to Isabel's clinic was a blur of adrenaline and shock. She was waiting outside, and her face fell when she saw him covered in soot and trembling. Oh my God, she whispered, rushing to help him from the truck. Are you hurt? They burned everything, Wilton said hoarsely. All my research, my equipment. They tried to kill me. Isabel? They actually shot at me. She led him inside and made him sit while she checked him for injuries. This isn't just about predator control anymore, she said grimly. Cole's running something bigger, something worth killing to protect. Wilton stared at his shaking hands. All my evidence, everything we've gathered. Not everything, Isabel said firmly. I've been making copies, and now we know for certain Cole's behind this, and he's willing to murder to keep it quiet. Wilton looked up at her, seeing the steel in her eyes. His initial impression of her as a skeptic had been wrong. She wasn't cautious out of fear, but from hard-won experience, now her caution had saved their evidence, and possibly his life. What do we do now, he asked. Now, Isabel said, her voice hard with determination, we get smart. We gather proof they can't burn or bury, and we make Cole pay for every animal he's killed, every life he's threatened. Through the clinic window, the night sky glowed orange with the distant fire of Wilton's burning cabin, a beacon of Cole's escalating violence, and a turning point in their fight to expose the truth. The morning sun filtered through the dusty windows of Isabel's veterinary clinic as she and Wilton huddled over scattered papers across her desk. Coffee cups, long since empty, sat forgotten at the edges of their makeshift investigation board. Look at these shipping manifests, Wilton said, his finger tracing along a column of numbers. Cole's ranch claims to be moving cattle, but the weights don't add up for livestock transport. Isabel leaned in closer, her brow furrowed. You're right. These containers are too small for the number of cattle listed. She shuffled through more documents, pulling out financial statements. And here, see these payments. They're routed through shell companies in Asia. Wilton's heart raced as the pieces started falling into place. Why would a cattle rancher need offshore accounts? They'd spent days gathering information, carefully piecing together fragments of Cole's operation. The burning of Wilton's cabin had only strengthened their resolve. Instead of backing down, they'd gone deeper, following paper trails and connecting dots that painted an increasingly disturbing picture. Isabel pulled up her laptop, typing rapidly. I've been cross-referencing these shipment dates with reported wildlife disappearances. Her voice grew tighter. Wilton, it's not just the leopards. There's a pattern here. Every time Cole's ranch makes these unusual shipments, we see a spike in missing predators. Bears, wolves, even mountain lions. He's not just killing them, Wilton said, his voice barely above a whisper. He's capturing them, selling them. The revelation hit him like a physical blow. The poisoned cubs weren't just casualties of a rancher's vendetta, they were merchandise. Their mother had likely been targeted for capture, the cubs considered either collateral damage or additional product for the black market. Isabel's face paled as she pulled up more files. These financial records, the amounts are massive. We're talking millions of dollars. Wilton, this isn't some small-time operation. Cole's built an empire trafficking protected species. Wilton stood up, pacing the small office. That's why he's so desperate to keep people off his land. The ranch is just a front. He stopped, turning to face Isabel. The cattle business gives him cover for all the equipment, the vehicles, the shipping containers. Nobody questions a successful rancher, and anyone who gets too close. Isabel's voice trailed off, both of them thinking about the burned cabin. They worked through the afternoon, methodically documenting everything. Bank statements showed regular deposits from companies that didn't exist. Shipping records revealed containers moving through ports with mismatched documentation. Every piece of evidence pointed to an operation far more sinister than simple predator control. Look at this, Isabel said, pointing to her screen. These veterinary supply orders, they're for sedatives and transport equipment, way more than any legitimate ranch would need. Wilton felt sick remembering the poisoned cubs. He's not just shooting predators, he's drugging them, trapping them alive. He ran his hands through his hair in frustration. That's why the mother leopard was so desperate. She probably watched them take her cubs. Isabel reached out, placing her hand on his arm. We have enough here to take him down, Wilton. But, she hesitated, going public with this will put targets on our backs. Cole's not going to let his empire crumble without a fight. Wilton looked at the wall of evidence they'd assembled. Financial records, shipping manifests, supply orders, all pointing to an international wildlife trafficking operation hidden behind the facade of a cattle ranch. The scope of it was staggering. We can't walk away, he said firmly. Those cubs, that mother, they're just the beginning. How many more animals will suffer if we don't stop this? Isabel stood up, moving to stand beside him. You're right. Her voice was steady, despite the fear he could see in her eyes. We have to expose him, but we need to be smart about this. Cole has money, influence, and he's already shown he's willing to use violence. They spent the next hour organizing their evidence, making copies, securing their findings. The weight of their discovery hung heavy in the air. They weren't just facing local intimidation anymore, they were preparing to expose an international criminal enterprise. We should split up the evidence, Isabel suggested, carefully placing documents into separate folders. Keep copies in different locations. If anything happens to one set, Wilton nodded, understanding the implications. We need to be ready to move fast once we start. Cole's got connections everywhere. Police, local government, shipping companies. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the clinic windows, Wilton and Isabel shared a look of grim determination. They had crossed the line. There was no going back now. The evidence spread before them told a story of greed, cruelty, and corruption that went far beyond Montana's borders. Whatever happens, Wilton said quietly, we have to see this through. Isabel nodded, her jaw set with resolve. We will. Cole's empire ends here. The Montana night wrapped around Wilton and Isabel like a thick blanket as they crouched behind a fallen log at the edge of Cole's property. Their breath came out invisible, puffs in the cold mountain air. Wilton pulled out his well-worn map, pointing to the locations they'd marked earlier. The shipping containers are here, he whispered, his finger tracing the path. And the guard rotation changes at midnight. That gives us a 30-minute window. Isabel nodded, adjusting the night vision camera hanging from her neck. Are you sure about this, Wilton? If Cole's men catch us, we need solid proof, he said firmly. Those cubs weren't just random victims. Every piece of evidence points to organized trafficking. They moved silently through the underbrush, Wilton leading the way with the practiced ease of someone who'd spent years navigating wilderness in the dark. The moon cast long shadows across Cole's sprawling ranch, making every tree stump look like a potential guard. Isabel watched Wilton work, impressed by his quiet competence. The man everyone in town dismissed as just another wildlife tech moved like a ghost. Each step carefully placed, each movement purposeful. They reached their first target, a clearing where shipping containers stood in neat rows. Here, Wilton breathed, pulling out a small camera. With quick, practiced motions, he secured it to a tree, angling it perfectly to capture the loading area. We'll need 3 more placed around the perimeter. As they worked their way around the property, Isabel felt her respect for Wilton growing. This wasn't just about saving 2 cubs anymore. He was willing to risk everything to expose a criminal empire. Movement? Isabel hissed suddenly, grabbing Wilton's arm. They dropped flat behind a ridge as flashlight beams swept the area. Wilton's heart hammered in his chest as boots crunched on gravel nearby. Check the south fence, a gruff voice called out. Boss wants extra patrols tonight. They lay completely still until the footsteps faded. Isabel realized she was still clutching Wilton's arm and quickly let go. Grateful the darkness hit her flushed cheeks. They managed to place 2 more cameras before reaching the main storage area. What they saw made Isabel's blood run cold. Cages, dozens of them, stacked and covered with tarps. Something inside one of them growled softly. Wilton's hands shook with anger as he documented everything with his camera. This is it, he whispered. Proof of the whole operation? A sudden flood of light bathed the area in harsh brightness. Well, a familiar voice drawled. Look what we have here. They spun around to find 3 of Cole's men blocking their escape route, rifles raised. The leader smiled coldly, reaching for his radio. Run! Wilton grabbed Isabel's hand, and they bolted into the darkness. Shouts erupted behind them, followed by the crack of gunfire. Isabel's heart threatened to burst from her chest as they crashed through the underbrush. Wilton led them down a steep ravine. His intimate knowledge of the terrain their only advantage, they splashed through an icy creek, scrambled up rocky slopes, and ducked through dense thickets. Their pursuers' voices echoed through the night, sometimes terrifyingly close. This way, Wilton gasped, pulling Isabel into a narrow gap between 2 boulders. They pressed themselves into the crevice, trying to quiet their ragged breathing as flashlight beams swept past their hiding spot. Where'd they go? Someone shouted nearby. Spread out. They couldn't have gotten far. Minutes stretched like hours. As they remained frozen in their hiding place, Isabel could feel Wilton's heart pounding where their bodies were pressed together. Finally, The voices began to fade as the search moved in the wrong direction. When they finally emerged, they were scratched, muddy, and trembling with adrenaline, but alive. And more importantly, they had their evidence. Wilton's camera was still clutched tightly in his hand, containing the damning photos that could bring down Cole's entire operation. They didn't speak until they were safely back at Isabel's clinic, their escape feeling almost surreal in the quiet pre-dawn hours. Isabel's hands shook as she poured them both coffee. That was, she started, then shook her head, unable to find the right words. Yeah, Wilton agreed softly, carefully downloading the photos to his laptop. But we got what we needed. Cole can't hide what he's doing anymore. Isabel studied him in the soft light, this quiet, brave man who refused to look away from injustice. We're not finished yet, she said. Cole won't go down without a fight. No, Wilton agreed, his eyes hard with determination. But neither will we. The dawn brought both hope and exhaustion as Wilton and Isabel carefully made their way to the local FBI field office. Their clothes were still mud-stained from the previous night's escape, but the evidence was secure, carefully backed up on multiple devices. Agent Thompson, Wilton said, his voice hoarse from lack of sleep as they met with the stern-faced federal agent. What we're about to show you proves everything we've been reporting. The agent's skepticism melted as she reviewed the photos and video footage, images of the cages, the shipping containers, the careful documentation of dates and locations. It painted an undeniable picture of organized wildlife trafficking. This is exactly what we needed, Agent Thompson said, her fingers flying across her keyboard as she processed the evidence. We've suspected Cole's operation for months, but could never get close enough. Isabel squeezed Wilton's arm as they watched multiple FBI vehicles roll out toward Cole's ranch. After so many weeks of feeling powerless, of being dismissed and threatened, it felt surreal to see the wheels of justice finally turning. We should check on the cubs, Wilton said softly. The adrenaline of the night was wearing off, replaced by bone-deep weariness. But his dedication never wavered. Back at Isabel's clinic, they found the mother leopard still maintaining her vigil outside, pacing with nervous energy. Inside, the two cubs lay in their heated enclosure. The stronger one lifted its head at their approach, eyes bright with recognition. They made it through the night, Isabel said, relief evident in her voice as she checked their vital signs. After everything that happened, at least we have this. Wilton allowed himself to smile, really smile, for the first time in weeks. He reached down to gently stroke the stronger cub's spotted fur. You're fighters, both of you. They spent the morning monitoring news reports as federal agents swarmed Cole's property. The ranch baron's carefully constructed facade was crumbling in real time. Local news crews captured footage of boxers being carried out, computers being seized, and Cole himself being led away in handcuffs, his face twisted with rage. I can hardly believe it, Isabel said, watching the coverage. He seemed untouchable for so long. Sometimes all it takes is one person willing to stand up, Wilton replied, though he knew it had taken far more than that. It had taken Isabel's help, the mother leopard's trust, and even the cub's will to survive. But their moment of triumph was shattered by a sudden change in the monitoring equipment. The weaker cub's vital signs were dropping rapidly. No, 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 Isabel muttered, rushing to the enclosure. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency as she checked the cub's condition. The poison did more damage than we thought. Its organs are failing. Wilton watched helplessly as Isabel tried everything she could to stabilize the cub. Minutes stretched into hours as they fought to save its life. The stronger siblings seemed to sense something was wrong, pressing close to its weakening brother. Despite all their efforts, despite all their hopes, they couldn't stop the inevitable. As the sun began to set, the weaker cub took its last breath, its small body finally giving in to the poison that had started this whole journey. Wilton felt tears sliding down his cheeks as he cradled the tiny body. All their victory, all their success in exposing Cole's crimes, it felt hollow in the face of this loss. Isabel's hand found his shoulder, offering silent support as they both grieved. Outside, the mother leopard's mournful cry echoed through the gathering darkness, as if she too knew she had lost one of her children. The surviving cub pressed against the enclosure wall, calling back to her. We did everything we could, Isabel said softly, her own voice thick with emotion. The poison was just too strong, had too much time to do damage before we found them. Wilton nodded, unable to speak. He thought of all the other animals that must have suffered and died because of Cole's greed. This small cub was just one more victim, but its death hit him harder than he could have imagined. The surviving cub still needs us, Isabel reminded him gently. And now we can make sure this doesn't happen to others. Cole's operation is finished. They buried the cub at sunrise, in a quiet spot behind the clinic where wildflowers grew. Wilton's hands were steady as he dug the small grave, though his heart felt like it was being squeezed in a vice. The mother leopard watched from the tree line, her presence a reminder of both their success and their failure. As they stood over the fresh earth, Isabel took Wilton's hand. Justice is coming, she said quietly. But you're right, the cost has been too high. The surviving cub was recovering well, growing stronger each day, but the empty space where its siblings should have been served as a constant reminder of what they'd lost in their fight for justice. Sometimes victory came with wounds that never fully healed. The death of the cub changed something in Wilton. His quiet determination hardened into steel, grief transforming into an unshakable resolve. As federal agents combed through Cole's empire, Wilton knew the fight wasn't over. Men like Cole didn't go down without unleashing every weapon in their arsenal. His instincts proved right just after midnight. The sound of approaching vehicles broke the peaceful silence around Isabel's clinic. Wilton, who had been keeping watch over the surviving cub, immediately recognized the threat. "Isabel," he called out in a harsh whisper. "We've got company." Through the clinic's windows, they watched 3 pickup trucks pull up, armed men spilling out into the darkness. The moonlight glinted off their weapons. "Cole's trying to destroy what's left of the evidence," Isabel said, quickly gathering their documentation, "and us with it." Wilton's mind raced. They couldn't stay in the clinic. It was too exposed, too vulnerable, but they couldn't leave the surviving cub behind either. The mother leopard, ever vigilant, melted away into the shadows as the men approached. The back trail, Wilton decided, already moving. Through the wilderness, it's our only chance. They worked quickly, Isabel securing the cub in a portable carrier while Wilton gathered essential supplies. The sound of breaking glass from the front of the clinic spurred them faster. Just as they slipped out the back door, gunshots shattered the night. Wilton pushed Isabel down as bullets splintered the wooden frame above them. The cub let out a frightened cry. "Run," Wilton commanded. "I'll lead them away." Isabel hesitated for just a moment before nodding, understanding the logic. She was the faster runner, and with the cub, she needed the head start. Wilton watched them disappear into the tree line before deliberately making noise, drawing their pursuers' attention. The chase that followed tested every bit of wilderness knowledge Wilton possessed. He led Cole's men through the roughest terrain. He knew, using the darkness and his intimate knowledge of the land to his advantage. The sound of their cursing and crashing through the brush told him his strategy was working. But these weren't amateur hunters. They were professionals, and they were gaining ground. A bullet whizzed past his ear, so close he felt the displacement of air. Wilton dove behind a fallen log, his heart hammering against his ribs. The mother leopard appeared like a ghost beside him, her presence both unexpected and somehow fitting. She looked at him with those intelligent eyes before melting away into the brush. Moments later, he heard shouts of alarm from his pursuers as she created a diversion, drawing some of them off in another direction. Wilton seized the opportunity, doubling back toward where he knew Isabel would be heading, an old ranger station they'd discussed as an emergency rendezvous point. But 2 of Cole's men had anticipated this move. They burst from the shadows, weapons raised. Wilton barely had time to react, throwing himself sideways as gunshots echoed through the trees. Pain blazed across his arm. A bullet had grazed him. The fight that followed was desperate and primal. Wilton used every advantage the wilderness offered. Loose rocks, low-hanging branches, the treacherous footing of the forest floor. He managed to disarm one man, sending them both tumbling down a steep embankment. The impact drove the breath from his lungs. But Wilton forced himself up, knowing that staying down meant death. His opponent wasn't moving, knocked unconscious. By the fall, the sound of approaching sirens cut through the night. Isabel must have managed to call for backup. The remaining gunmen hesitated, suddenly unsure, and that moment of uncertainty was all Wilton needed. He tackled the man, sending the weapon flying into the underbrush. Federal agents swarmed the area, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. They found Cole himself in one of the trucks, orchestrating the assault via radio, his face contorted with rage as they dragged him out in handcuffs. Dawn was breaking as Wilton reunited with Isabel at the ranger station. The cub was safe, remarkably calm despite everything. The mother leopard appeared at the edge of the clearing, as if confirming her child's safety. "It's over," Isabel said, treating Wilton's arm with supplies from the station's first aid kit. Really over this time, Wilton watched as Cole was led away to a waiting police car, his empire crumbling around him. The ranch baron's face was a mask of defeat and fury as reporters swarmed, cameras flashing. His reputation, his power, his carefully constructed facade, all of it destroyed by the quiet persistence of a man he had underestimated. "The evidence?" Wilton asked. "Safe," Isabel confirmed. "I uploaded everything to multiple secure locations. Before they attacked, Cole's trafficking operation is exposed completely. He won't hurt another animal." The dawn light painted the Montana Valley in soft gold as Wilton Reeves stood at the edge of the forest clearing. His shoulders carried the weight of recent events. Cole's arrest, the dangerous confrontation, and most heavily, the loss of one precious cub. The morning dew dampened his worn boots, but he barely noticed, lost in thoughts of what could have been done differently. Isabel's pickup truck rumbled up the dirt road behind him. She stepped out, her practical field clothes blending with the early morning shadows. Her sharp eyes softened when she saw his expression. "You're thinking about the cub again, aren't you?" she asked gently, coming to stand beside him. Wilton nodded, his throat tight. "I keep wondering if we'd moved faster, gathered evidence sooner." "Don't," Isabel said firmly, placing a hand on his arm. "You did everything humanly possible, more than anyone else would have done. but the guilt lingered in his eyes. The memory of the tiny body growing still haunted him, despite their ultimate victory over Cole's criminal empire. The federal authorities had dismantled the trafficking operation, uncovering evidence of years of illegal wildlife trade. Cole faced serious charges, his influence finally broken. A rustling in the undergrowth caught their attention. The mother leopard emerged from the shadows, her movements fluid and cautious. Behind her, stronger now, came the surviving cub. The young animal's coat gleamed with health, its steps sure and playful. Wilton's breath caught as he watched them. "Look at that," Isabel whispered. "That's because of you, Wilton. That cub is alive because you refused to look the other way." The cub pounced on a butterfly, showing none of the weakness that had nearly claimed its life weeks ago. Its mother watched with alert patience, her own injuries healed. They represented everything. Wilton had fought for the right of these creatures to exist without fear of human cruelty. "The valley's different now," Isabel continued, her voice warm with admiration. "Cole's gone. His men are gone. The other ranchers are starting to work with us on better predator management. You changed things, Wilton, not just for these two, but for all the wildlife here." Wilton watched as the cub scrambled up a fallen log, displaying the natural vigor that had seemed impossible during those desperate days of treatment. "I couldn't have done it alone," he said quietly, glancing at Isabel. She smiled, and something passed between them, an understanding built on shared danger and shared purpose. Their relationship had transformed from initial skepticism to deep trust. "And now perhaps something more. No one ever really thought much of what I did before," Wilton admitted. "Just the quiet guy who counted tracks and filed reports." "They were wrong about you," Isabel said firmly. "I was wrong about you at first. But you showed everyone what real courage looks like, not with big words or grand gestures, but by simply refusing to back down when it mattered most." The mother leopard lifted her head, meeting Wilton's gaze for a long moment. There was no fear in her eyes now, no desperate plea for help. She was wild and free, as she should be. With a flick of her tail, she turned and moved deeper into the forest. Her cub bounded after her, pausing once to look back at the humans who had saved its life. Wilton felt something release in his chest as he watched them disappear into their natural habitat. The pain of losing one cub would never fully fade, but seeing the survivor thriving helped ease the ache. This was what mattered. This moment, this victory, this small but significant change he'd helped create. Isabel's hand found her fingers intertwining with his own. The gesture felt natural, right? "You know," she said, "I think we make a pretty good team." Wilton squeezed her hand gently, feeling the warmth of connection replace the cold isolation he'd known for so long. "Yeah," he replied softly, "I think we do." The morning sun climbed higher, touching the treetops with light. In the distance, birds called and life continued its eternal cycle. But here, in this moment, something had shifted. Wilton stood recognized, valued, no longer the overlooked observer, but someone who had made a real difference. And beside him stood Isabel, their shared commitment to protecting wildlife now, enriched by deeper feelings, neither needed to name just yet. The surviving cub's playful yowl echoed from the forest, a sound of pure joy and freedom. It was the best testament to everything they'd fought for, a reminder that sometimes, even in the face of overwhelming odds, courage and persistence could change the world, one small life at a time. If this ending felt like it was written for you, subscribe and join me tomorrow for another story that might feel the same.